So thank you very much for the introduction, and a big thank you to Andy Sutton and Professor Nigel Ling for organising today's event. I'd also like to just thank David Hay from BT Heritage for lending me a video I thought I'd start with to almost set the context to where were we in 1984. And when you see the video and some of the pictures in the film, it starts to convey a totally different world, and a world which is way removed from that. After that video, I'll then give a little flavour of what it felt like to be involved with Cellnet in the mid-80s, and then finish with a vision that we filmed in 1997 called the Mobile Millennium. That's another video as well to finish with. So 3 parts. Here's the first video from BT Heritage. And if I can maximise it.
If you're on the move all day, keeping in touch can be quite a problem. What do you do when your office is wherever you are that day? How do you stay in touch? And how can people reach you when a lot of the most important business you do is miles away from 4 walls and a phone? Today's businessman is on the move, but if he's smart, he's never out of touch. Thanks to British Telecom, he takes his phone with him. He can't afford not to. For example, each of you sitting here right now is away from your office, away from your phone. A lot of you may have driven here. Now, if you'd had one of these in-car cell phones, you could have made quite a few important phone calls on your way. Push a few buttons, and you're in business. And of course, people could have rung you, direct to your office on wheels, so you're always in touch, wherever you are. How does it work? Your message is picked up by the nearest radio transmitter, which is connected to a Cellnet mobile exchange. This computer-controlled exchange automatically connects your call to the British Telecom network. In a matter of seconds, you're through to the telephone on someone's desk. Your secretary, for example. And to ring you, all she or anyone else has to remember is one number. Because wherever you are, the system automatically locates you and puts the call through. Magic. Meanwhile, to make life even simpler, you can pre-program your cell phone so you only have to remember 2 digits for those numbers you call all the time, like your office or your key buyers. On-hook dialing, too, means you only have to pick up the phone when they pick up. Now, the transportable phone is just as simple. It has all the features of the in-car phone, push-button dialing, memory storage, and the messages, again, are transmitted instantaneously through to computer-controlled exchanges that connect you to the number you want. In fact, these cell phones are probably more modern than the phones you have in your office right now, with 3-way conference facilities, so you can solve a problem right on site with all the people on the line talking to each other firsthand, getting the business done faster, easier, and better. There is a third variety, portable, which works on exactly the same principle as the in-car and transportable cell phone and has all the same advantages: push-button dialing, memory storage, 3-way conference facility, and something so important to your business which all 3 cell phones feature: call transfer. This means you can direct all your incoming calls to whatever number you want, leaving you free to concentrate on one piece of business at a time without causing everything else to come to a standstill. Think of the advantages. You're always getting people talking to each other, whether you're available or not. Then later, when you're ready to talk, you can redirect all your calls back to you. Call transfer is also handy when you're on the road, because you can just transfer your calls to your client's office as you're arriving, staying in touch outside your car as well as in. In-car, portable, and transportable. Each cell phone is designed to help you stay in touch when you're on the move, plus the power to direct your calls to wherever you want them to go, all at the touch of a button. It's no small revolution, so it's no surprise that the company behind this revolution is British Telecom. This breakthrough in mobile communication is based on a cellular system where the entire UK is divided into small areas, or cells, each of which is served by its own radio transmitter. This network of cells, Cellnet, enables you from a moving car, a building site, or even a golf course to link into the existing public telephone network and ring anyone, anywhere in Great Britain, or in fact the world, just as you would from an ordinary phone. Complicated? Not for you. All you have to do is decide whether you want the in-car, portable, or transportable cell phone. We at British Telecom, together with our nationwide network of approved cell phone dealers, are right here to help you make that decision. Well, actually, I'll be out of the office all day, but you can always ring me on my cell phone.
Cellnet, the system for people on the move who need to be on the phone. Cell phone from British Telecom.
So as you can see, a few quaint images there from the 1980s, and you can see the emphasis very much on the corporate customer rather than the consumer. You can see the emphasis very much on perhaps car phones and people on the move rather than portables. And you can also see a rather technology-orientated focus perhaps from the BT film that was there. But what's not so obvious is how that BT-Cellnet relationship worked, because at the end of the day, all the channels needed to be independent. So BT was a sales channel for Cellnet, and Vodafone Retail was a sales channel for Vodafone. But there were many independent dealers. So at the time, there was quite a different world. Now, one of the things that may not be known by many of you is that between 1986 and 1992, the UK was the second largest mobile market in the world. And that was because we were one of the first to have competition. We were also one of the first to have those independent distribution channels. And I can't see, oh, there's the cursor, it's okay. So I just thought I'd touch briefly on some of the things from that era and some of the things that we've seen that have changed as a reflection of 30 years of mobile phones in the UK. So it was much more than networks alone. It was very much those distribution channels. But to me, there were 12 key enablers really that we've seen. I think there's the range of devices, whether they be feature phones, smartphones or tablets that we've seen more recently, and those devices continue to evolve to the extent that we see 2 billion shipments every year today. Also the generation of technology, whether it's 1G, first generation analog tax, through to 5G that is foreseen from 2020 that others will speak about. But also the introduction of Bluetooth that's enabled us to have connectivity between mobile phones and computers and mobile phones and cameras, and more recently mobile phones and many other things like medical instruments. The arrival of Wi-Fi wasn't considered in the 1980s, but certainly with the smartphones in the the latter part of last decade, Wi-Fi has become even more significant. But we've also seen things like numbering open up and change, so we can actually identify when you're calling a mobile number that it has the 7 in front of it in the UK. That starts to mean that the numbering plans and the capacity started to affect the types of services and how they were described to customers. The role of GPS in more recent years for location services, and the growing importance of indoor as well as outdoor sites. The importance of disguising sites so that they can be part of street signs has become very significant. Certainly in more recent times, we've seen lots of issues around wearables and new types of devices, whether it be from machine to machine, much more interest in data analytics and digital. What surprised me was when I looked at Business Life last summer, and they talked about the range of phones over time and the innovation, calling it survival of the slickest. You know, from the large phones on the far left from about 1984 through to the rather larger phones, again, but smartphones on the far right through to 2011. Not all pictures do show the Apple at the very beginning, because the first Apple phones really were from around 2007 really, and smartphones much more adapted recently. We've also seen, I think, significant interest in terms of change to do with social media, how we can think about diagnosing the different data sources, web searches, and lab tests for future. And let me just touch on some industries that have been created. I mean, I think since 1985, about 15 new industries can be identified as having been created that were not there at the very beginning. So texting, even if Neil did send the first text message or SMS from a computer, we couldn't actually have interoperable text until 1989 in this country between the different networks, because interoperability between the networks did not exist until then. And that started to open up all sorts of things like short codes for premium rate services. That also started to open up charity text, which raised something like £80 million for charity last year. We also saw the mobile data revolution start to open up email, and Stuart Newstead with GPRS will say a bit more about that later. We've seen also the growth in recent times of instant messaging, whether we call it Skype or other forms of instant messaging. So the whole messaging three industries have changed radically from the beginning. I think also when we look at photography, nobody really imagined having a camera in a mobile phone at the beginning. They thought it was nonsense. Why would you put a camera inside a mobile phone? I mean, initially there wasn't room. We didn't want to add weight to it. We didn't want to reduce the talk time, which was originally only about 30 minutes per battery. And therefore photography really came later, but now we wouldn't expect to buy a mobile phone without photography. Equally, the rise of video that we've seen, I think, has started to change the way people film in a work sense or in a consumer sense around the world. Even photographers themselves use video to maybe pre-screen certain things. Search, I think, also has changed as an industry. The idea of Google, but even Siri and other forms of search methodology was just not there at the beginning because internet was not designed in from the start. So areas like photo, video and search industries have really changed. What's also significant was when we started to see games being added by Nokia and indeed others. So some of you may remember the old Snake game on the first Nokia phones. But other mobile games now are much more typically available, either downloadable off the web or even designed into some mobile phones and pre-provisioned. The mobile internet has certainly created huge industries, and now companies like Google and many others, Facebook, talk about a mobile-first strategy because actually they can see that's the best way to reach close on 8 billion people on this planet. The app story is quite significant in terms of the number of apps being developed now, but actually the range of apps is huge in terms of how it's exploding into every sector. There are three particular sectors, though, that I think are standing out now. E-commerce, the way you can actually buy off the web with your mobile, maybe ticketing, the way you can swipe and pay for certain tickets, and the rise of e-health. Now, you might say I'm missing out on education, you might say I'm missing out on other e-industries, but they really have started already, e-commerce, e-ticketing and e-health. And certainly when we look to social media, most people don't really communicate with social media unless they have a smartphone. Most smartphone contact is with social media. It's not always from a laptop these days or a PC. Mobile data is enabling all sorts of new industries, whether it be in e-health, whether it be in other fields of fitness and wellness. We're starting to see a lot more interest in terms of business transactions. And e-books aren't always typically considered part of the mobile story, but really they are part of the mobile story in the sense that people get information on the move, whether it's news, but things like reading material that could be relevant to their own purposes. I think, though, it's much more than the applications and the networks. And I think when we see some of the distribution channels that have changed, not just in name, but also in style, we get more distribution channels to do with data now. Online distribution channels as well as physical distribution channels. In the early years, there used to be just things like London Car Telephone and organizations like that. Securicor in its own right was a distribution channel. Nowadays, there are many more MVNOs, such as Tesco Mobile, such as some of the other distribution channels, such as Labara and so on. But the distribution channels now extend much more fully into the world of data, so areas like M2M or machine-to-machine distribution channels, or those that specialize in certain sectors like serving electricity meters and smart meters. That also has meant since 1985 the whole care revolution was quite different. How do you care for somebody who has to pay a bill to you where he may be buying something and served through a third party? So the customer care started to move into wholesale and retail customer care in a way that's actually changed and led to huge business for many British companies that were in that wholesale retail layer of software. The credit checking you might think is a narrow lesson from this area, but I remember from about 1987 when some Germans came across and they very proudly said, we've got credit checking down from 6 months to 30 days. And I said, well, that's very good. We've just got it down to 3 minutes. and their whole idea of needing to do credit checking in a much faster time zone wasn't there in the late 80s. I think they're probably there now, but the credit checking mechanisms have certainly been enhanced to minimize the risk of fraud, but also to enable different types of service. One of the reasons pay-as-you-go came about in probably the mid-1990s was actually because the Italians and the Portuguese thought it would be a good idea to do it, to try a new market. They realized in Italy, for example, that some of the credit checking mechanisms in Italy were not strong enough to sell to some customers because the fraud risks were too high. So they introduced a prepay or pay-as-you-go mechanism in the mid-1990s. And the same was true in Portugal. We saw that because their banking system was well linked and they were able to use some of the banking system to help with prepaid top-up. So we took lessons from both Italy and Portugal to actually introduce things like pay-as-you-go type phones in the mid-90s. That also was coupled with more and more competition. It wasn't just Vodafone versus Cellnet, it was competition. So things like itemized billing became important to get the corporate customer interested. Itemized billing maybe by location, as well as time of day, itemized by type of call. All sorts of itemized billing enabled all sorts of interesting IT developments and services. Per second billing, I think it was Orange who introduced that first. And per second billing as a notion in the 1980s was just nuts. People thought we're struggling to bill per minute, never mind per second. But Orange chose to introduce that as a differentiator and maybe for other reasons. Bundles, I think, came along much later. So things like the maximum number of minutes you can have within your monthly fee would be X. And then more recently, we've seen bundles of text messages and bundles of data. That's become quite different in terms of how the proposition has developed. The SIM card and identity management and fraud prevention have always been key aspects of this industry, whether it's the smart card in the phone, and even if we see that evolve, as we will do in the future, the SIM card is the key contact point between the network and the customer. Identity management then has to link to that in terms of your service profile, in terms of ways of actually helping the police if there's a warrant for arrest, for example. Identity management is also important for the type of service you may wish to see. But fraud prevention has been within the DNA of this industry. We've seen growth in memory cards because more and more data is being consumed. Therefore, the need for portable memory cards and swappable memory cards is much more significant. And that's probably outsold the number of memory cards you see in cameras today because of the nature of activity taking place. Roaming is often not talked about. I was chairman of the GSM Association 20 years ago. And one of the things that we did there was we put in place the operational standards to make sure operators could work with overseas operators so that you could access an overseas network and have a choice of those overseas networks. That was initially for voice only and then was extended to data in more recent years. But some of that area of roaming has led to specialists, such as specialist clearinghouses in the roaming arena, and also more specialist interconnect arrangements that have supported that. Because at the end of the day, if you as Cellnet are sending customers to an overseas country, you want to make sure there's compatible service, compatible roaming arrangements for that customer to get good service, but also make sure there's no fraudulent activity in the process. So whatever we say about pricing, roaming has stood the test of time, even if some of the mechanisms have changed. I was on a flight back from Spain only yesterday, and they reminded us about the flight safe mode. That was a phrase that didn't used to be in the language of the 1980s or the 1990s. The flight safe mode obviously was because of concern to do with interference between mobile phones and planes, as yet unproven. However, the flight safe mode has entered the vernacular of pilots around the world. More recently, I think we've seen a lot more interest in machine-to-machine, so connected machines. It's no longer people. And more interest in areas like smart metering, where we, as O2, have a contract for rolling out 2/3 of UK smart meters in the next 5 years. Now that means connecting the smart meter, not manufacturing the smart meter, but connecting the smart meter to go into people's homes to help measure energy, gas or electricity. We also can see a huge momentum towards the Internet of Things, where more and more things will be controlled in the home, whether it be in the home or in the city. So your ability to connect machines, and as such, this area has been enabled significantly by GPRS, or 2.5G as we often call it, where Cellnet was first in the world to launch a few years ago. So that whole area of data has been a revolution, but to me, those approaches help to underpin the 15 new industries I described earlier on. So what next? Well, I think we are going to see ongoing innovation, investment and choice. I was thinking briefly about the reference to innovation earlier on. One of the things that we did as Cellnet back in 1989 was, and you'll see the Sony phone that's out there on analog tax, was we thought back in 1989, could we extend the life of analog into the mid-1990s? So I was sent on a mission to Japan to look at some of the leading consumer brands to see, could we import some consumer brands that could compete with the NECs or Motorola's of the day? And fortunately, we managed to cut a deal with Sony and fortunately sold a few million Sony mobile phones in this country on the Cellnet analog network. And that Sony phone out there extended the life of 1G or TACs through to the mid-1990s. But what we also did was, without any government-backed program, we had our own digital switchover program, which enabled us to move from analog TACs to digital GSM within the space of 3 years, 1994 to 1996. That's a very rapid changeover without any government backing to switch over from analog completely switched off to digital completely switched on in 1996. We couldn't have done that without sort of careful planning and strong engineering, and that's been at the heart of a lot of the Cellnet activity since the very beginning. Some very strong partnerships that have helped us with the investment and the rollout. But in the DNA of our industry, there's also been choice, and it's not just choice about GSM-based services or even 3G and 4G and future services, but it's about how do we maximize the choice and distribution, care, and reach. We'd always like more coverage. We continue to invest over £600 million a year in the UK to help extend that choice, but the investment levels are very significant. So what we're hoping to deliver in more and more digital services, the majority of our business today, I would say, is by far, in traffic terms, non-voice, and those digital services are now reaching into every sector. We're really in the digital economy. We're doing more and more work on smart homes, not just smart meters, but other aspects in smart homes. We're also working on all sorts of smart city activities. There's a picture there of a driverless car that we're supporting in Greenwich later on this year. We're also looking at some other new mobile internet services. But to me, mobile and internet are two of the greatest inventions of the 20th century. And I find it ironic that there's reference also earlier on today to Michael Harrison. His father used to live in the flat next door to my father in the block in Spain that I've just left only yesterday on our annual summer holiday. And you know, as a family, they clearly had made a lot of money from the Rakel empire even before Vodafone was launched. So it wasn't as if Vodafone didn't have their own power behind the button when they launched Vodafone in the UK, in the same way as we had the honest and strong support from BT. We also had some significant support from the technologies, as I mentioned earlier on, but one of the areas that's often forgotten is we should perhaps map out the sponsorship over the years. Who has sponsored who and why? I mean, we've had some sponsorship of motor racing and famous names, as Vodafone have. We had an interesting match once between the England rugby team and the Irish rugby team when it was O2 versus O2 once. You know. We'll see some interesting sponsorship at the up-and-coming Rugby World Cup as well with O2 on the logo. So even though we've changed our name, we've remained committed very loyally over 25 years to English rugby. We were once upon a time on the Middlesbrough football shirts, and then that migrated to Arsenal, causing a bit of a north-south divide. We're no longer sponsoring soccer, but we have also sponsored tennis in the past, as well as rugby today. So I thought I'd just finish then with a video that was filmed in 1997, and it was a vision for 2007, and we called it the mobile millennium. And the reason we called it that was we wanted to try and predict where the world of GSM would go with the adoption of data, and how the arrival of 3G would require more spectrum to offer many more services. So at its time, it was quite revolutionary when we filmed it in 1997. My colleague Brian Greasley and some colleagues at Cellnet crafted this themselves. And I'd like to share that with video. And I'd like you to try and spot what things we can't do today, recognizing we're 8 years on the end of the 2007 window, what things we can't do today. So it was our prediction for 2007. I'll give you now the mobile millennium. Here we go.
Purchases total £57.42. Please tender electronic cash now.
Complete transaction. Transaction complete.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Yeah, bye.
January 1997.
Right. And what about everything for your presentation?
It's all in here. Mum, you'll watch me, won't you? You have remembered your mobile, haven't you?
Of course.
Dad,
Can I watch you repeat this evening?
together.
Promise.
Hi, it's me. Got time to talk? Good.
The next southbound train terminates at Moore. News file.
My dear, you are outrageous. Yeah, well, Oliver's more than all right, actually.
Cellnet. Send a message.
Enter message.
Message starts. This was 10 years ago. Can you believe it? Let's all talk. Regards, Mark. End message. Use my handwriting.
Message recorded.
Attach a conference call request to that last message and send it to Lisa Perry and...
Stansted Airport, please.
Stansted Airport, Gov. Stansted Airport direct.
Stansted Airport. Turn left at next junction.
Good morning, Richard. You have new email and messages.
Let's see the mail.
Email.
Okay, and the messages?
Messages.
Mark Banks.
Your conference call is scheduled in 8 minutes. Do you want to read the revised agenda message?
Yeah, okay.
At the roundabout, straight on.
Yeah. Yes, I know. She bangs on about that constantly. Oh, hang on.
Mr. Tang Chong, Shanghai Advanced Trading.
Big client on the line. Gotta go. Bye. Mr. Tan Chong, good morning. How may I help you?
把2个数目都交给我好吧
Yes, I see.
And although the fault is minor, it's extremely unfortunate that it coincides with the launch of the new product range.
Yes, most unfortunate.
So you can appreciate our PR problems if we can't get engineers briefed and all the European components adjusted immediately. I hoped you could help us with this in the UK.
We certainly can, Mr. Tan Chong. I'm in touch with all the people
Engineering
you need.
Continental Europe availability.
I know exactly where they are at any moment. And now, of course, we're also in touch with similar contacts throughout Europe.
真的全欧洲都能打通 Lisa
按指下键就可以得到全部信息
Okay, so give me figures for both.
You'll have them by mid-afternoon.
Show me all the unbooked window seats. Switch my seat for 23A.
You are ticketed for boarding.
Welcome to Nationwide. Here's where you enter your mortgage details.
Cellnet data search.
Data search.
List all customers who haven't ordered for the last 3 months and cross-refer with the same period last year. Mark Banks. Great to hear from you. Talk later. Regards, Richard. Message ends.
Conference call time options were requested by Mark Banks.
Right. Between 6 and 8 this evening.
Susan Gilby. Richard Thomas. Christiane Moore.
So where are you?
Or is that secret?
No. I'm right here.
Global positioning system.
Oh, you're drowning?
I'm fishing. This wonderful wilderness. You jealous?
Oh, only very. Oh, sorry, Mark. I've got a rush.
No change there then.
Well, can we talk again at 7?
I've got one on. That's perfect.
Yeah. Okay, Jim. I'll go see him. Oh, Claire will be overjoyed. All right, I'll see you on Friday. Okay, bye. Cellnet scheduler. Find a company-approved hotel with a single room in the centre of Hanover for tonight. One with a swimming pool, if possible. Cancel my return flight to London from here today, and find me a flight tomorrow to get me from Hanover to London by 8 p.m. Make provisional bookings and then show me the options. Now dial Claire.
That's just come out.
So you mean I get the latest model? Great.
Just like the one you lost. Except with a 2-week battery life, a wireless camera, and a handset. It'll be there by the time you arrive. When you switch it on, I'll call you to restore all your personal data from the Cellnet backup.
Thanks. That's excellent.
Goodbye, Mr. Banks.
Bye. Conference call now.
Mm-hmm.
She was flushed with success.
Go on.
I'm telling you, her presentation was absolutely brilliant.
Well, look, put a recording in my mailbox and I'll watch it and call her later. Okay. Here's a surprise for you.
Lisa Perry.
Hi, guys. Remember me?
Sure. Mark Banks.
Hang on.
All of you. Hi.
Hello. Didn't you used to be Mark Banks?
So I hope you enjoyed that little canter through history, filmed 18 years ago, and we didn't get it perfectly right in 1997 for 2007, but there are a few things still missing, I'm afraid. Thank you.